Okay, it's a couple minutes after the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our annual Ready, Set, Go Wildfire Preparedness webinar. For those that don't know me, I am Nani Barretto, and I'm with Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization. And we also have Jessica and Elizabeth on the call with us today. If you want to give a quick wave, and together we will be sharing some tips and tricks so that you can be prepared ahead of the upcoming fire season. So thank you again for being with us. I'm going to launch a quick poll to find out a little bit about who we have on the call today. It should have popped up in front of you. If you could please respond to the 3 questions that just popped up on your screen. They are asking how familiar you are with some of the material we'll be covering. Be sure to scroll down so that you can see questions 2 and 3. I see the responses coming in. I know there's 3 questions. I'll give you another second. And for those that were fast enough to respond to that, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And it looks like, hopefully you can see what's in front of you, but it looks like we have a really diverse set of folks on today's webinar, which is great. It seems there'll be a little bit for everybody during today's presentation. So again, our primary goal for the next hour is for you to walk away feeling more confident about what you can do to be prepared for this year's dry season. A little bit about the organization, Hawaii Wildfire Management Organization. We are a nonprofit that serves statewide and across the Western Pacific. We've been around for more than 20 years now, since 2000. And since that time, we've become the region's primary hub of wildfire information, wildfire planning, all things risk reduction. We serve in partnership with our agency and our community partners to protect our island communities and our natural and cultural resources from fire. We can't see everybody on the call today, but I do know we have some local fire departments here. And we have a lot of our community leaders from our Firewise neighborhood. So I want to give them a big public shout out for partnering with us on this work before we get started. Some key takeaways, if nothing else, this is what we want you to leave here knowing today. First, Hawaii has a big wildfire problem. We are on par with the most fire-prone states in the Western continental US. Second, the impacts of fire are broad and long-lasting, and they impact resources from Mauka to Makai. 3, most fires in Hawaii are started by people, mostly accidentally, which means there's a lot we can do to prevent them. 4, it's going to take all of us to keep our families, our homes, our communities safe from fire. And last, there's a role for everyone, and there's a lot we can do ahead of time, both individually and collectively as communities and islands. I'm going to hand it off to Elizabeth to discuss fire in Hawaii and why we should care about it.
Thank you, Nani. Well, we want to start this webinar off with the foundational point that Hawaii has a wildfire problem and that the wildfire problem is increasing. And we have 3 reasons for that. We have more drought episodes, we have expansion of non-native fire-prone vegetation, and especially grasses, and we have increasing accidental ignitions by people. And the impacts of those take place from Mauka to Makai. So we have burning native forests and sensitive habitats, upland, and then downslope. We see post-fire erosion that enters nearshore waters and smothers coral reefs. And these impacts not only affect natural resources, but they also affect municipal infrastructure and budgets and traffic, human health from smoke during fires, and also post-fire dust. And of course, we're always worried about our lives and safety of both our community members and our firefighters. And it's important to note that at this point, on average, we rival the Western US most fire-prone states in terms of the percentage of our land area that burns each year. So our acre numbers might be lower, but the proportion of our state that burns is still really high, and it leaves these long-lasting and broad consequences. And so what we have here is a map of wildfire ignitions, and these are all fire ignition points that took place over a 10-year span of records that we analyzed. We are updating this map, but with all the new numbers, and we're in the process of doing that, but the trends and patterns remain the same as what we saw during this effort. So there's a few important things that we want to point out that we learned from collecting all of these, our fire agencies' records across the state and then mapping them. The first thing we want to point out is that fires are being ignited on both windward and leeward sides on every single island in the state. So every red dot on this map indicates that a fire occurred there that required a fire suppression response by our agencies. And each dot represents the fire location and ignition point, but not the total area or the perimeter of the fire that burned. So we also learned from this effort that fires are frequently larger on the leeward sides because those areas tend to be drier, but under dry conditions, anywhere can burn, including those that happen on the windward sides. So when it comes to fire, you need both ignitions and burnable fuel to have a wildfire in the first place. And we have ignitions everywhere. And we also have fuel everywhere of different types. And so at this point, the greatest factor that influences wildfire risk is how dry the vegetation is at any given time per area. And another thing, and finally, what we learned is that 99% of fires are started by people, and 3/4 of those are started accidentally. And for us, that's pretty hopeful because it means that the potential to reduce fires and reduce ignitions is ours. It's in our control, as long as our friends, ourselves, our neighbors, the greater public all has a better awareness about wildfire being an issue, and we know how to be more careful in the activities that we choose to do, choosing good times for when and where we do certain kinds of activities, and being careful with things like campfires and fireworks and using equipment and where we drive our vehicles. And so there's a lot of prevention possibility here given our situation. So I want to talk for a minute about the weather outlook. So Hawaii has done fairly well during our wet season overall. You could see that only the Hamakua area is experiencing some level of drought. But we do know that El Nino is favored to develop in the next few months. And under typical El Nino onset, Hawaii would usually expect fairly wet conditions during the summer, but for some reason, it's really looking like the models are favoring it to be dry. And then, we're looking at drought development and potentially an active fire season, in the August timeframe. So our partners at the National Weather Service are going to provide the forecast in just a couple of weeks of what our dry season will look like. But we're really looking at, we're anticipating that what it's going to look like is that, it'll start being dry in August, and then we're going to have an extended dry season that goes even into the winter. So what does that mean for fire potential? It looks like, starting in August or after, it'll be above normal and significant in terms of fire risk. So because of that, all of our agencies and partner organizations across the state are going to relaunch our annual wildfire awareness and preparedness campaign. It's called Wildfire and Drought Lookout, so that everybody can be aware and informed about what you can do to prevent fire, to prepare ahead of time. And all that information can be found on our website, and I think it's going to be dropped in the chat box, so you can look toward that as well as we head into this upcoming season. And then before we dive into today's real content, which is our Ready, Set, Go preparedness information, we do want to emphasize that the idea, we want to emphasize this idea that it takes everyone to protect our lands, our waters, and our people across the state from wildfire. So I want to point out our firefighters do an amazing job at putting out fires, but everyone needs to be a part of preventing accidental fire ignitions. We all need to manage our fire risk, our vegetation in our yards, and around our neighborhoods. We need to have our families prepared, our properties prepared, and everything all made better and ready to survive any fires that might come close. So that's all within our power, and we can do it ourselves, and we can do it together. And we're excited about you being here today, because the good news is that with wildfire, unlike other natural hazards, there's just so much we can all do, because fire can only burn where there's fuel. And you can do a lot about that. And it can only burn when there's an ignition, and we can prevent that. So there's just so much we can do. And we're so glad you're here today to dive into the Ready, Set, Go program with us so that we can all maximize our safety and protection together. So thanks for beginning that already today. And that's what we're going to do from here forward. We're going to learn the detailed strategies on the proactive actions that you can take using the Ready, Set, Go principles in the Hawaii specific version of the National Ready, Set, Go program. This information is based on a lot of hard-earned lessons and that came actually from some very destructive fires during which a number of fatalities occurred. When people were evacuating too late, they were underprepared, they got caught in smoke and fire-filled roads and traffic. So what we're trying to do is to be proactive. The Ready, Set, Go program was developed to enable us to do so. So what you will learn today covers the entire timeline from before fire season through a fire event, if that should happen, and also that you can maximize your chances for safety and for the safety of your home, your yard, and really, most importantly, your family and your neighbors. So with that, that kind of covers the orientation to what we're doing today and why we're doing it. And I want to pass it off to Nani to dive into the specifics of Ready, Set, Go.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Okay, so first up is being ready for wildfire. And there are 3 ways, all of them proven to be effective. And this is what we're going to go over next. So 1, by creating defensible space around your home, which really emphasizes managing the vegetation. And then 2 is hardening your home, making sure that your home is made of fire-resistant materials and is designed with wildfire in mind. And then that 3rd section is evacuation planning and practicing. So again, these are the ready portions of the Ready, Set, Go approach, and you'll notice the ready part is the longest part of today's presentation. So first is creating defensible space around your home and doing this really ahead of time, not when there's smoke in the air, not when you get an evacuation alert. Actually, the best time to do this is after things are done greening up and when vegetation is starting to dry out, which is usually around this time and the beginning of summer every year. So a prepared home means a defendable one, hence the term defensible space. A first responder really should be able to have enough access and feel like their life's not in danger when protecting your home. It also means the vegetation around the house or even around the community as a whole is managed in a way that can resist a wildfire ignition in the first place and then keep a wildfire from spreading in the event of an actual ignition. So on the screen, let's look at these 2 pictures here and maybe think about what differences you might see. For example, the greenery looking on the left-hand side, you might notice is short, there's hydrated grass, there's not a lot of dead vegetation or debris piles. The trees over there are spaced apart. They're located further away from the home structure. That driveway, it seems to have a lot of clearance for firefighting access. That's the kind of things we're looking at. And then if you look on the right-hand side of that picture, you might not know immediately what you're looking at, but try to notice the ashy areas. The gray ashy on the right there, these are actually remnants of 3 houses that were not able to be defended. Likely because the vegetation was overgrown or unmanaged, maybe it was too close to the home, maybe the home was unreachable or unsafe for firefighters, and probably a combination of all of that. Luckily, not a lot of houses in Hawaii have been burned from wildfires, which is why these pictures come from the continental US. And I don't want to say at least not yet, because hopefully we can keep it that way. But it really is going to require us to focus more on managing our vegetation and keeping our homes hardened, because wildfires are our new reality in Hawaii, especially given our changing climate and our land use patterns. So with that said, I want to show you the various ways that structures can ignite, and it might be different than what you think. So I'm going to launch another quick poll. Let's see, it should have popped up, but how do you think structures ignite? If you could quickly answer that, and I'll share back the results. Okay, I'm going to Oops, they're still coming in. Okay, some of you are really thinking. I like that. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Share back the results. Okay, there you have it. It looks like for the most part, you all understand that structures can ignite from embers from nearby wildfires. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that on this next screen. Okay, so it turns out homes and vegetation can be ignited in 3 ways, and all 3 are shown on this screen here. First, from direct contact with flames. That's, the most obvious one. The second, they can ignite from radiant heat down there in the bottom left. And that's when air is superheated from fire and it comes into contact with something that has lower heat tolerance. For example, our grasses here in Hawaii, they can be easily ignited. And they can be ignited just from the heat that comes from, for example, an idling car's exhaust. No spark is needed in that instance, just the heat, which is why one of our talking points for preventing fires is please no pulling over on dry grass and on a hot day. And then that third one on the right there, homes and vegetation can ignite from embers. On a windy day, embers can fly long distances through the air, and not just from nearby fires, but from distant ones as well. Embers are basically those little burning bits of vegetation or other material that's carried by the wind. And again, for miles sometimes, especially here in Hawaii. And then they can land in a dry leaf pile, for example. Maybe it's next to your gutter or under your lanai deck, or maybe they even land on the dog bed that's outside next to your front door or in your eaves. So again, it is these wind-driven small embers that can ignite close to your home or on your house and can be what burns the entire house down. So since these wind-driven ember ignitions are a real thing, it really no longer matters if your house is smack dab in the middle of a neighborhood. Not even that will provide you with protection. Even these homes are susceptible just as much as the houses on the perimeter of the neighborhood. So it's important to remember that. And it is these ember ignitions in Hawaii that make a wildfire so dangerous, because depending on where the various embers land and whether it lands on something that can ignite, fires can start up in multiple parts of a neighborhood at the same time. And if that happens, every house becomes exponentially more exposed to either the direct flames, the radiant heat, or even embers. Okay, so defensible space, we also call it the home ignition zone. A definition first. So defensible space is that buffer you create between a building on your property and its surrounding vegetation. So that is the grass, the trees, the shrubs, or any wildland area that surrounds the structure. This buffer is what's needed so that a wildfire that is approaching can either slow down or even completely stop and keep your home protected from catching on fire. And if that buffer is there, the house won't be able to sustain flames for an extended period of time, which this is important because we know that during catastrophic wildfire events, or in instances where the house is hard to get to during a wildfire event, firefighters can't defend everybody's homes. They do what they can and they're awesome at what they do, but we really do need to do what we can to keep a fire from igniting our personal homes and properties. So in short, if you have defensible space, the chances of your home being safe are much higher. Mainly, again, because it's going to resist fire in the first place, but it might also provide a safe place from which firefighters can position themselves to defend your home. So let's look a little bit at this graphic here on the screen. As you can see, there's 3 focal areas, or what we call zones. The first zone on the far left is the 0 to 5 foot zone, which is the first 0 to 5 feet from your house, which also includes the house itself. We sometimes refer to this as the non-combustible zone. So for this area, we want to keep it completely free of any combustible materials, or at least as much as we can, so that in the event of a windblown ember reaching this area, there's no materials to burn. Or even if there is a little bit of combustible material nearby, that material will burn a little and then die out. So now continue to move further away from the house on that graphic. That next zone, the middle zone, is the 5 to 30 feet zone. We like to call this zone the lean, clean, and green zone. And for this area, really we want the vegetation to be lean or very minimal, spaced apart, thinking about spaced apart, doing so both horizontally and vertically. And also clean, that is having all the dead and dying vegetation and debris removed or cleared from this area. And then green is just making sure the vegetation that is there is green, healthy, possibly drought tolerant. And then the third zone, the red there, moving away from the house, is the 30 to 100-foot zone, also known as the wildland fuels reduction zone. So for this zone, removing fuels can reduce the speed and intensity in the event of approaching wildfire. And by the way, if the far reaches of your property sort of are, they're far from your house, but they might be close to your neighbor's structure or maybe close to their yard, it's important that you consider that fact and mitigate that risk, that shared risk, as soon as you can. This will protect you from fires coming from their side, but it also will protect them as well. So, I like to think of this being a case where being a good neighbor is actually helpful to both parties, because it really does protect everyone. So again, these are the 3 zones. Remember these zones as you prepare your home and yard this season. Focus your time and energy first within that first zone closest to your home. Again, that's the 0 to 5 feet zone, which includes your house. This is where, you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of keeping your house protected. And it will come from prioritizing your time and efforts there within this zone. So after you've done the work in this zone, then you can continue working your way outwards from the house as your time and energy permits. So again, start close to your house, do what you can, and then work your way outwards. And finally, think through any actions you might need to take on the parameter so that there's greater safety for your neighbors as well, because ultimately what protects your neighbors might also be what protects your house too. Okay, so now that we have learned how structures ignite and why it's important to create defensible space and manage your vegetation, I'm going to hand it over to Jessica, our Hawaii Wildfire Mitigation Specialist, who is going to walk you through some specific tips for creating defensible space within these zones. What she has to offer is more practical, so feel free to take notes, although we are recording and we'll share back with you. There's a chat box if you have questions, and we can address some of those questions at the end of the presentation. And again, these are the actions that you'll be able to take the next time you're working outdoors doing your yard work. So I'm going to hand it off to you, Jessica.
Awesome. Thanks, Nani. All right. So what we can do as homeowners or renters to create defensible space. Let's start with tips for creating defensible space within the first zone, the zone closest to your home, those first 5 feet. Again, this zone is known as the non-combustible zone, so it's really important that materials within this zone be resistant to ignition or non-combustible. One tip is to not use combustible materials like bark, wood chips, or mulch, but instead use hardscape like gravel, pavers, and concrete. Plants within this zone should be limited to those that grow low to the ground, don't have a lot of woody materials, and those that can be properly watered and maintained. This kind of landscaping is considered xeriscape landscapes because the plants need little to no water beyond what the natural climate already provides, thus resulting in being fire resistant. Another important tip within this zone is to remove all dead and dying plant materials. We're talking weeds, grass, plants, shrubs, trees, branches, any vegetative debris that is already dying or is on its way out. That means you'll also have to check and possibly clean on a regular basis your roofs, gutters, lanais, porches, stairways, underneath posts and piers in order to remove debris that could potentially ignite from embers. Check your propane tanks, make sure they are clear of vegetative debris. Try to limit combustible items on top of your decks or lanais, like outdoor furnitures, planters, etc. It's been documented that embers have ignited homes by initially igniting outdoor combustible furniture pieces. You can also reduce the ignition potential by relocating lumber and combustible materials away from the home. Final practical tips for this first zone is to replace wooden fences, gates, and arbors that are attached to the home with non-combustible alternatives like fire-resistant vinyl or metal. You might also want to consider relocating your garbage and recycling containers if they are housed inside this zone since these receptacles commonly create nooks for ember gathering. Okay, what we can do in the second zone, the zone that is 5 to 30 feet away from the house. Practical tips in this zone should focus on keeping vegetation lean. In other words, minimal and spread apart. Clean, where all the brown and dead or dying vegetation is removed, and green, where the vegetation looks green and healthy and can deal with dry conditions or needs minimal watering. It's important in this zone to remove branches that hang over your roof, since these could potentially catch your roof on fire. Remove or prune flammable plants and shrubs to keep that fuel load down. Keep the grass mowed to a maximum height of 4 inches, which will reduce the potential of a fire spreading along the ground. It could even stop the fire in its tracks.
Hey, Jessica, really quick on that note of mowing. This time last year, I said this at last year's webinar too, but I read an article about some firefighters in California having to put out a vegetation fire that ignited. It turns out the cause was from someone mowing their grass to do exactly what we're telling them to do to reduce their hazardous fuels. But they did it in the early afternoon when vegetation was really dry and the weather was super hot and windy. So new messaging immediately went out from the fire department, reminding everyone, as you're doing these activities, preparing your yard, just consider the hazards that are involved, like when mowing dry vegetation in the hot afternoon sun, because it's true, fires can easily ignite and spread when using equipment that has the ability to spark, even a lawnmower. So, and of course, this applies to us in Hawaii too. So do things when it's cool and be aware of your weather conditions when you're out mowing and not windy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nani. Keeping vegetation lean within this zone also means reducing ladder fuels. Ladder fuels are vegetation that can carry a fire that burns in low-growing vegetation to nearby taller vegetation. Example of ladder fuels include low-lying branches and shrubs and trees under the canopy of a larger tree. This is also the zone where you want to consider replacing any and all of the dry, fire-prone vegetation with more fire-resistant vegetation. We refer to the type of vegetation that is less likely to ignite from embers, fire-wise vegetation. They are often plants that are native to Hawaii because they have already adapted to this climate, are drought tolerant, and produce minimal leaf litter. We have a list of native fire-wise plants on our website in the form of a bookmark or cheat sheet, and you'll also be able to find a link in this chat box. The last practical tip for creating space that is defensible is making sure your home is accessible by the fire department. Accessibility for their vehicles means a clearance of 14 feet wide and 14 feet tall. Accessibility is also making sure your address is visible so that the fire department can locate your home. This idea of accessibility often is overlooked, so be sure you consider it when you're thinking through your plan for creating defensible space. Okay, next up in our ready portion of Ready, Set, Go guidelines is home hardening.
Okay, I just launched another poll, Jessica. This poll, folks, just one question. Reflect and rate your current understanding of home hardening. I'll give you a second. And thanks for engaging with us and participating in these polls. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Most of you responded, and I'm going to share back the results. And yeah, it looks like you're kind of split down the middle. Some of you know more about it than others. So this is a good section. I think there's going to be a little bit of information for everybody in this next section about home hardening.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so let's start with the definition. Home hardening addresses the most vulnerable components of your house with building materials and installation techniques that increase resistance to heat, flames, and embers that accompany most wildfires. Home hardening is a very important aspect to your home's survivability during a wildfire. Any openings or weaknesses where combustible debris accumulates or where embers can get into your home can result in a structure fire that starts from the inside out.
Okay, another quick poll. Let's see, make sure you guys are all awake with us. Here we go, just launched it. Okay, what do you think about the expenses you would incur if you were to use wildfire resistant building materials versus non-resistant ones? Do you think those wildfire resistant building materials would be way more expensive, comparable, more cheaper, or you just don't know, or maybe you're on your mid-afternoon nap? Okay, and I can even tell you before I share back the results, for the most part, it looks like a lot of you think that the materials are comparable and a lot of you just don't know. So why don't you let us know, Jessica? Or is this the part I'm supposed to talk about? Okay. Yeah, I can talk about this a little bit. I mean, honestly, the answer isn't really simple for this one. I mean, starting a new home from scratch with all non-combustible materials obviously is the best way to go. But most of us are having to do retrofits on our houses. And depending on the retrofit and the materials, the prices really do vary. For instance, right now, I know the price of wood, it's been pretty high. So if you're going to replace your wooden fence anyway, you may as well do it with something cheaper like cinder or rock, and then it's more fire resistant too. So, you know, everything kind of depends on the work you're doing and the market prices. But one thing we always like to tell folks is that anything that you do, anything that you can replace with something more non-combustible, especially your roof, your siding, your fences, your walls, it's going to be worth it. Every replacement reduces that risk and it helps a home withstand a wildfire.
Perfect. Thanks, Nani. Let's dive in deeper to specific ways to harden your home. The left side of the house on this infographic has used building materials and installation techniques that increase this home's vulnerability, or said differently, it reduces its survivability to ember ignition. On the other hand, the right side of the house depicts building materials and installation techniques that harden the home and increase its survivability. So when I look at this, I think about my house, and there's things like I have eaves that I need to close. All of my windows are double pane, but they are missing some screens that I'll need to replace. For decks, you want a lot of space between joists to avoid tight nooks and crannies where embers can land and smolder. And you want to screen the under area in to keep the embers out. I'm going to play this video. It is from the Insurance Institute of Business and Home Safety Research Institution. They house a simulator, I think, in North Carolina, where they can conduct highly realistic wildfire simulations to explore how embers storms ignite structures. Watch this. So as you saw, you can see here the real life footage of a house where one side of this house has been hardened with non-combustible building materials, and the other side is not hardened. While embers are equally hitting both sides of the house, the embers that hit the mitigated right side burn out quickly and don't ignite the structure. And the side that was not hardened turns into an active fire that requires firefighter response to extinguish it. Going back to the Ready, Set, Go handbook, in the middle of the gutter part, you'll find this 2-pager for hardening your home. It walks you through every aspect of the housing materials and installation procedures for how your house can be hardened and better protected. It is crucial to remember that home hardening requires you to think about anywhere embers could possibly get into your house. This includes any and all gaps and cracks, the uncovered vents, and anywhere leaf litter and other debris might accumulate. We usually see homes ignite when embers get into the crevices and into the house. Home hardening can be done during the original build, which is obviously preferred, or of course, it can be done as a retrofit later on.
Okay, before we leave this section of defensible space and home hardening, I just want to make sure everybody here on this webinar knows that this year we have funding in place that allows us to provide free home assessments to any Hawaii homeowner that requests one. These assessments, they're one-on-one consultations between you and a trained volunteer home assessor, so that you can get house and yard mitigation recommendations that are individualized and tailored to you. So please go to our website if you're interested in signing up for one. Elizabeth will drop that link into the chat, and please sign up for one while funding lasts. We have 14 assessors across the islands. If you live too far from one of them, we'll just ask, if you could gather a few of your neighbors so that the assessor can do some back-to-back assessments in one trip.
I was lucky enough to shadow a few assessors, and I was super impressed by how friendly and knowledgeable they were. Okay, so that's it for defensible space and home hardening, and on to the third part of Ready section of Ready, Set, Go. And that is evacuation planning. Evacuation planning includes developing a plan, making sure the whole family is involved and everyone is aware of what is going to happen in case of a wildfire event. And practicing ahead of time is a super important part of being prepared for a wildfire.
Okay, I think this is our last poll. I just launched it. Do you already have a plan for how you and your family will evacuate in the event of a wildfire? 3 options. Yes, it's written and practiced. Yes, but not formally on paper, and definitely not practiced by my family. Or no, not yet. Or maybe there's something in between. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share back. And I can definitely say that I fall right in line with the majority. Which is yes, but not formally on paper and definitely not practiced by my family. I'm going to hand it back to you, Jessica.
Awesome, thank you. To help those that don't have an evacuation plan in place yet, there are templates inside our Hawaii Ready, Set, Go handbook that you and your family can easily use so that your evacuation plan is in writing and on paper. After thinking it through and putting it on paper, it is good practice to keep the plan somewhere handy and accessible, maybe taped on your safe or on the refrigerator or inside your go bag, places that mainly somewhere obvious and easily accessible where you'll be able to remember. And once the plan is on paper and stored somewhere obvious, you don't want to stop there. Now would be the time to practice it, which is just as important as coming up with it. You might want to consider including your friends and neighbors in the plan or helping them with their plan, especially those that might need some extra assistance in evacuating. Not everyone has the capacity to evacuate on their own. So thinking through who might need some extra help, like our kapuna, our neighbors with disabilities, or people without methods of transportation. Always plan to evacuate your pets and have their supplies and plan easily accessible as well. The evacuation plan template inside the Ready, Set, Go handbook also has space for you to fill in the contact information of people on your evacuation plan, along with 2 meeting location options. Remember, you can't practice enough. Practice, practice, practice. You might even find out that something on your written plan just doesn't work right, so you might need to revise it. And then you can feel good that you are as prepared as you can be in the event of a wildfire. And that's a wrap. That's a wrap up for the Ready portion of Ready, Set, Go handbook. And I'm going to hand it off to Elizabeth to take us through the Set and Go portions.
Thanks, Jessica. And Jessica and Nani may have mentioned this earlier, but the Ready part has the 3 things that they just went through, and that's longer. And set and go are much shorter, but they are equally essential to preparedness and readiness and safety. So I want to talk about set, and being set is basically maintaining awareness or paying attention to what's happening around you. And there are lots of indications, if you look around, that will let you know that fire hazard is high. So in the fire world, we call that situational awareness. And that's what set is all about. So to show what we mean when we say having situational awareness, we have long used this meme to sort of make our point. So I'm not sure, sometimes people can't see this, but does everyone see what's happening behind the divers who haven't yet noticed what is going on in their surroundings? We'd like to use this image or this metaphor for situational awareness because it's just so relevant in making the point that if you pay attention, wildfire season and wildfire events just don't have to sneak up on you and catch you off guard. So hopefully you're laughing and not scared now, but there's a lot we can do to be aware and to maintain situational awareness for wildfires. So situational awareness needs to take place in two ways. Throughout the year, you can watch the state and the color of the vegetation. So notice when it's drying out, when the green grass and the vegetation is starting to turn yellow and then brown and then gray, and it's going from supple to really like dry and pokey, looking a little dead sometimes. Let that alert you that the fire hazard is increasing, and let it make you hustle into taking action for preparedness in the ready ways that Jessica just went over. Second, in addition to watching seasonally, you want to keep aware of when there's a fire event near you or in your general vicinity. So during a fire and through the day, winds often change direction. So the fire intensity and spread is kind of like moving around, changing all the time. So don't assume that because a fire or its smoke looks far away that or because maybe wind is blowing fire away from your neighborhood, don't assume that it's going to stay that way, in perpetuity. So stay alert, be aware, really be hypervigilant in maintaining your awareness about the status of that fire. So in this picture, you can see this is a picture from West Maui a few years back. And in the early stages of the fire, it really looked at first like the fire was blowing uphill and away from residential areas. But then if you look at the next slide, you're going to be able to see that later in the day when the winds changed, the fire and smoke traveled in the opposite direction, directly threatening lives and homes in that area. I think this was in West Maui. Fires really can travel fast and they can change directions often. So stay vigilant, and that will help you and your family to be more prepared. And then just, remember again, I know we keep, emphasizing this point, but it's really important that you remember that fires don't just happen from direct flame contact, but they also happen from superheated air and embers floating in the wind that can travel miles and ignite whatever they land on, including debris, your leaf debris in your gutters, your green waste piles, the nooks and crannies of your home. They can get in there and smolder and ignite. Anywhere that wind is blowing leaves into piles, it's going to blow an ember straight into that pile and ignite that. So, Nani even talked about how your home can burn from the inside out if an ember lands in just the right place. So for this reason, a fire that occurs sort of close by, say several miles away, is still a threat that you need to be wary of and prepared to deal with. So that's it about, paying attention and situational awareness seasonally and during active fire events. But now I want to talk about the go portion of Ready, Set, Go. So we're going to show you a video real quick of a driver documenting their escape from an ember storm that took place. This happened in Alberta, Canada, the Fort McMurray fire, which was really famous. But this really, we don't have any Hawaii footage, but we know this is what it looks like for those of us who've been in fires. It can be very smoky. There are embers floating. It's scary. Just notice the traffic, notice the smoke. Keep in mind that even while the cars are moving slowly, people's minds and hearts are racing. They're scared, nervous. Even that can lead to medical issues and accidents and traffic accidents. And all of that leads into additional harm along the way during an evacuation. So it's just better not to be in this scenario, but rather to evacuate early, keep the roads clear as possible for emergency responders. The time to do ready and to get your home and yard prepared and your family prepared is not when there's already fire nearby and it's evacuation time. That is supposed to take place months ahead of time, weeks ahead of time, way before fire season, as soon as you're starting to notice things dry out. Ideally, you've been paying attention all season long. You have been aware of the fire all day long, and you're ready. You've been using your situational awareness. You're tracking what's happening. And then if there's a fire nearby, you know, you've got eyes on it. You've been paying attention. You can use your own judgment and your own situational awareness to leave early. And you can go at that point, if you've been ready and set, to go with a piece of knowing that your home and family are as prepared as possible. And the responsible thing to do is get out of the active fire event area, keep your loved ones safe, not add to the problem by becoming a search and rescue or a late evacuation or a medical or a traffic accident. You can just leave early. That's really just the point in the Ready, Set, Go program, is not to wait and stay and defend at that point. You just want to get out because you've done all you can. So the message here is like, leave early, even before there's an evacuation notice, just go. And this recommendation is both coming at the national level and at the Hawaii level, and it's based on all these analyses and lessons learned from tracking, you know, how we can best reduce risk. And the majority of fatalities occur during congested evacuation traffic. So keep in mind, we need to keep our roads clear for emergency responders who need to get into an area to defend it. And if you leave early, even way early before the evacuation order, just remember, you can always return later. If it turns out not to be necessary, you can go shopping, you can go to dinner, you can go to the beach, whatever, but the safest place is very far away from a fire. And a high traffic evacuation is really stressful, and sometimes the last place you want to be caught. So the time to prepare and get everything ready is way ahead of time, and the time to leave is early. And so that's the go part of Ready, Set, Go. So it's not just get out or evacuate when you're told, but really the message here is to be using your own awareness and leave early and get out of Dodge, and don't be a part of all of that scary stuff that happens during an evacuation, if at all possible. So that said, you know, you can make sure you're staying alerted to any evacuation orders that are issued. You can follow the directives given to you by those who are coordinating the safest exit and shelter plans given the situation. Especially if you haven't been able to leave early, you need to really be monitoring and on top of the official and accurate communication. So we strongly encourage you to sign up for your county's emergency management or civil defense alerts. And those are the agencies that are going to be coordinating and issuing directives and information. So they work closely with all of our emergency managers to give you the best information possible. So Nani is pasting the link in for you to sign up in the chat box. And that's essentially all we have for the set and go portions. And that concludes actually all of the Ready, Set, Go components. And you'll find that all the things we mentioned and we talked about have even more detail in the Ready, Set, Go action guide. So I want to summarize real quick before we wrap up what we covered today. So we're challenging you to take action around the Ready, Set, Go principles that you learned today. So you can go off with your family and around your home and yard and take action and sign up for your emergency alerts. But here's a quick summary. So what you want to do is you want to have your yard ready with defensible space. You want to have your home hardened with non-combustible building materials. You want to have you and your family well prepared in advance of fire with an evacuation plan, not just completed, but also practiced and fine-tuned. And we want to make sure that you've included neighbors or any others who might need help in your planning and practicing stages. Also, remember your pets, plan for them too. That's ready. Set, we want to remind you to stay alert throughout the year. Notice when things are getting dry by staying alert and taking action as you see it getting dry, and then stay alert and vigilant during any nearby fire events. That's set. And then go is to go early, if at all possible, in the event of a nearby wildfire. So if you follow these recommendations, you can at least have the comfort of knowing that you have done all you can. You were ready, you were prepared, you optimized all your chances to keep everyone safe and keep your home and yard protected. We want to let you know that the comprehensive Hawaii-specific Ready, Set, Go handbook is available for you to dive into and get to know all the details. It's available digitally on our website. We have paper copies available too if you want one. And also, if you want to request them in bulk, We welcome that so that you can help us distribute them widely within your neighborhoods or social networks or school or church groups or whatever, wherever you think people would be interested in this information. We do want to get it out there, and we could use your help to do that. So you can look in the chat box or go to hawaiiwildfire.org to get the links in order to access those materials. And then this year, we're offering everybody on today's webinar a chance to earn a free Hawaii Wildfire t-shirt, which we are all very excited about. And so we're calling it our Ready, Set, Go Action Challenge. So we are challenging you to sign up for and get a free home and yard consultation, and then put in place one of the mitigation recommendations, and then send us a picture of it. And the first handful of people who do that will get a free t-shirt. And also, we just really want to start the process of everybody getting informed and taking action and getting excited about being safer and more prepared. So with that, I'm going to send it over to Nani. But first, I just really want to thank you for listening, for signing up, for coming, sharing your time with us today, and learning all of this stuff and taking action as soon as possible. Because it's really important stuff, and Hawaii's facing fire more and more, and it's really up to all of us to get as prepared as possible. So thank you so much for being here. And then with that, I'm just going to hand it to Nani, and you can wrap us up.
Okay, great, thanks. So yeah, just before we part ways, I'm going to quickly share some additional resources with you, and then we will open it up for questions and discussions from the audience. And then for those that do need to leave early, we just ask that you click on the link that's going in the chat box right now so that you can complete a quick 10-second feedback survey sometime today. And again, like Elizabeth said, really thank you to each of you for showing up today and learning what it is you can do to prepare for this year's dry season. It really does take all of us. So thanks again. Okay, so this slide here, this is our primary resource that accompanies the statewide all agency endorsed information campaign that Elizabeth talked about earlier. We call that the Wildfire and Drought Lookout. So that on the screen, it's our 2-pager. You can see the front and back right there. And it covers some of the key Ready, Set, Go actions we went over today. And it also includes tips to prevent fires. It's also available on our campaign's webpage. I put that link in the chat box. But please do know we encourage everyone to pass this information along to really anyone and everyone, your neighbors, your homeowner associations, if you have one, your friends, your family members, because we want everyone to know that we live in a fire-prone state and that there's things we can do to keep our resources and our communities safe. So this year's campaign is it gets launched on June 1st, and it will continue throughout the summer month. And you may notice some kiki voices on the radio because we have some public service announcements going out across all the islands. And then secondly, if you're interested in joining together with your neighbors, like I know so many of you here who are on today's call are already doing this, we invite you to learn about our Hawaii Firewise USA Communities program. This is a national program led by the National Fire Protection Association. And then Hawaii Wildfire, we serve as the regional coordinator of the Hawaii chapter. And we do this in partnership with our State Division of Forestry and Wildlife. On this next screen here, you can see a map where we currently have the 14 nationally recognized Firewise communities across the state. And I'm happy to say we have 4 more that are currently underway. And on the right there, you can see the amount of work they're doing within their communities. They work hard, they have fun, we have fun together, we connect as a network across the islands on a regular basis. And we're all doing what we can to keep, to play our part in keeping our islands, our island communities safe, including our first responders and our natural resources. So again, if you're interested in learning more about this program, Elizabeth should have dropped the link to our website about that in the chat. You can also email us directly. And then finally, we do have tons more resources on our website, hawaiiwildfire.org. You can also follow us on social media or subscribe to our Hawaii Wildfire newsletters. And that way you're always staying up to date on the latest and greatest of everything wildfire related, including news, tools, workshops or learning opportunities, and other communications. And as a last slide, we want to say once more that there is greater protection for the entire community when everyone participates proactively. By taking actions around your homes and with your neighbors, it really does all add up to keep us better protected from fire and fire threats. So thank you again for joining us today and for doing your part. I'm looking at the time and we nailed it. We're just under an hour long. And before we leave, we want to thank all of our various partners and our friends that do this work with us, including our county and our state fire agencies, our emergency management folks, our first responders, of course, the entire CERT community, our FireWise communities, especially the resident leaders and their community ambassadors, our natural resource managers, our watershed partnerships, our elected officials. I could go on, and I apologize if I miss anyone, but it really is all of us doing this work on behalf of all of us. So next up, we will open the floor to all of you. So please stick around for Q&A if you're interested. However, this does conclude today's webinar. And again, before leaving the Zoom meeting, if you could click on that survey link that's in the chat box and spend just a couple minutes, actually a couple seconds, giving us your feedback on how we did today. We would greatly appreciate it. And with that, I want to wish you a great rest of your day, and we hope to stay connected over time. So please stay in touch with us. Aloha. Okay, well, I think we could probably come off of, I invite all of you. We're just opening it up. For those that have to leave can leave, but for those that have specific questions, or maybe you had questions that weren't answered in the chat box, we welcome or invite you to come off mute. You're welcome to turn on your videos if you'd like, but we're here for you guys.